Welcome back, everyone. This is episode 6 of Spiritual Shadowboxing, and today we are talking about transforming racism into connection and kindness empathically. Fereshta, I will hand the mic over to you to do a little introduction to our lovely guest today. Thank you so much in advance.
Heck yeah, thank you. I am so thrilled to have Tony here, Tony Scruggs, aka Simba. We met on Marianne's congressional campaign trail. You had just come back from learning nonviolence with the Gandhi family in India. And your light, what I remember was just being like pulled on a conveyor belt energetically towards you. And we just were like, blah, 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 blah. And I don't even know how much time it was because it felt timeless. Mm-hmm. And I was inspired. And so we have remained friends through the years, quietly, digitally. And Tony taught me some really amazing things about empathy, about team humanity. I learned since then his sports background, and very recently took in an incredible education around racism. So I'm just incredibly honored that you're here to continue our learning, and grateful for what you are bringing to the world right now. Anything else you want to add to the intro?
I'm just really grateful and appreciative to be here, to have heard that reflection of our connection. And I just imagine through our conversation, my story will be told in a way that is truly lovely and alive for me. So thank you for having me here, ladies.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, thank you. So, sir, where would you like to start off today? We have so many juicy topics.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I guess I would start with just my journey really quick. So a quick version of my journey is, as Fereshta said, my name is Tony Scruggs. I am a trauma-informed empathy coach specializing in nonviolence for communication, which is also known as nonviolent communication. But I have some teammates and fraternity brothers who heard the term nonviolent for communication as an indictment of their character, somehow that saying that they were violent. And when I switched it up just slightly to nonviolence for communication, that wall was no longer there. So I refer to it as nonviolence for communication. But for anybody listening, if you've ever heard of NVC or nonviolent communication, same exact thing. And I was mentored personally by the architect, Marshall Rosenberg. My stops along the way include UCLA as a student athlete and fraternity guy, Major League Baseball with the Texas Rangers, back when President Bush used to run the team. And as Fereshta said, India with Gandhi's grandson, Arun Gandhi, where I learned the philosophy of nonviolence and the tools of nonviolence for communication. And then in just the last year and a half, I have been trained in trauma and resiliency by some of the top experts in the world, including one of the silence breakers, a woman named Louise Godbold, who runs Echo Parenting in Los Angeles, and one of my favorite neuro magicians named Sarah Payton, who wrote the Empathic Guide to Trauma. So she wrote it in all nonviolence for communication language called Your Resonant Self. So that's a little bit of my journey, and however you want to take it from anything you've heard, I'm ready.
Wow.
Amazing.
We don't even know where to begin with that.
Yeah.
So much, right? So, Kel?
You're going to put me in the hot seat.
I'm going to right now because I'm thinking about what I want to say.
So I think the first thing that comes up for me is when you're talking about studying with Gandhi's grandson and talking about nonviolent communication or nonviolence for communication, how have you translated that in terms of your teaching from the standpoint of racism and helping people to live anti-racist lives?
Great question. Thank you, Kel. So if nonviolence, from what I learned, and if you can imagine, I'm in Mumbai. I am sitting in one of the ashrams that Mahatma Gandhi was teaching and coaching Martin Luther King Jr. in. And I'm learning from his grandson, who was the one grandson who lived with him for 10 years. So there was one grandchild that lived with Mahatma Gandhi. And so it's coming firsthand. And he's teaching me that nonviolence, the philosophy is, the way he put it, if violence is painful energy turned into attacking force, then nonviolence is the constant awareness that attacking force comes from painful energy. So everywhere I go and I notice attacking force, my first thought is, this is coming from a place of painful energy. I really need to connect with that, and without judgment, remember that that's where it's coming from. Mm-hmm. That leads directly into the conversation about racism, because whenever there is attacking force, I'm thinking, this is painful energy. This isn't about Tony. This isn't about the ancestors who are kind of flowing through me right now, kicking me in my stomach and my neck going, dude, we got to heal. We got to heal. Let's do this. I can remember, okay, empathize with them, empathize with myself, and then really recognize that this person is coming at me with attacking force from their painful energy. So stick a pin in that for a second. They taught me in India, in Mumbai, in the ashrams, in the mud huts, that nonviolence for communication, which most people don't realize, nonviolence, the philosophy, and nonviolence for communication, the strategy, are two very different things that are very connected. And yet many people practice the philosophy without speaking the strategy. So it's really fascinating to be lucky enough to know both. And nonviolence for communication, the way that I was taught, is a way of speaking that takes judgment out of conversation. So a way of speaking that takes judgment out of conversation. And how it does that is by stepping away from the right-wrong square and stepping into an empathic circle. So if you think of your question, how does this relate to how I coach people in transforming racism into connection and kindness empathically, and how it connects to the philosophy of nonviolence? I recognize that attacking force comes from painful energy. And then I can speak into existence my feelings, my unmet needs. I can think about their feelings and their unmet needs. And then when I say it externally, it's in a way that steps away from the right-wrong square, and it speaks without judgment. And just a quick example, not about this topic, but a quick example of what this looks like in practical action. I'm in the passenger seat of a friend's car, and Fereshta knows this story. I'm in the passenger seat of a friend's car, and seemingly out of nowhere, somebody moved in front of us without putting on their turn signal. So there's many ways to interpret that. In fact, the way I just said that, they moved in front of our car without putting on a turn signal, is a version of nonviolence for communication. My first response, I was scared for my safety. I felt scared. I was needing safety that I wasn't getting. I was also concerned about the well-being of everybody involved, my friend and the other person in the car. So I wanted to know two things. I wanted to know what was going on for that other person, you know, that slight attacking violence that kind of moved in front of us. And I also, in a self-full way, equaling my needs with the other person's needs, self-full, I wanted them to know what was going on for me. So as much as I wanted to know what was going on for them, I wanted them to know what was going on for me. Here's the example of when it's speaking in judgments. My friend, in that immediate moment, said, "That MFer cut me off. What the F is wrong with people? Let's go catch him and kick his butt." That was more, instead of speaking in observations without judgment, that was more speaking in judgments and connecting his thoughts to his judgment, and then wanting to punch the other person in the face with their demands instead of hugging them with the request. So I use that example because I think it was a wonderful, that it exemplified what nonviolence for communication is and the current way most of the people in our lives speak. And I noticed for me, because I was scared for my safety and concerned for my well-being, I could be in that state of slight terror or grief or anxiety, but I wasn't living in it. And my friend, it took about an hour for him to become, and that's why it's so great to be trauma-informed. I recognized that he was fully activated. He wasn't in brain 4 or brain 3 or brain 2. He was straight survival brain in brain 1. So I was able to actually connect with the other driver, empathize with myself, guess what I was feeling and needing, and then be able to deactivate my friend at the same time. So hopefully that relates to the answer, that I can do that around the conversation of race, just the way I did that in this specific moment on the freeway with my friend and this other person. Does that make any sense?
It makes all the sense in the world. And it's actually a fantastic analogy, because that is something that's very approachable, and most people have or call that road rage, but most people have that inclination toward, reacting the way that your friend did, right? I think it takes it takes work, right? Like, this didn't happen. I would imagine, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine at some point in your younger life, you may have reacted that same way that your friend did. Maybe.
Well, growing up in clubhouses and being in a fraternity and being an African-American, or being an American of African ancestry in this culture, I was definitely trained to use different language. So it is amazingly wonderful to be able to have kind of reframed and reorganized and downloaded new ways of being. And one of the things that some people are surprised of, and it actually surprised me that not everybody did this, and maybe KW can relate as somebody who is so proficient in boxing, the practice skills that I learned as a young athlete, I just thought that's how you improve and get better and continue to learn and grow. So when I would read a book, I would take notes and I would practice the same way I'd practice every day in football, basketball, or baseball. When I would learn a new philosophy, I would practice every day the way that I did with football, baseball, and basketball. So somebody presented empathic communication or nonviolence for communication. I went and grabbed the video. I watched it while I did yoga. I practiced it later that day. And every day for the first month, I watched the video. And then every week, a month at a time after that, I would practice once a week all the talking points or all the main points that I'd learned. I thought everybody did that. Turns out some people go to the course like once a year and then they don't practice until they go again the next year. And I was like, dude, that's scary. And what I learned is when I was playing baseball once, I got hurt for the first time in my life at like 21 years old, which is, it's kind of odd to have broken a bone or gotten hurt that late in life. But I was out for 2 weeks where I wasn't seeing a 90-mile-an-hour spheroid flying at me. After 2 weeks, the first time I saw it, I didn't see it. And in that moment, I realized it only takes 2 weeks to undo a lifetime of practice. And I vowed to myself, whatever it is that I want to learn, what I want to know, what I want to be flexible and nimble at any given moment, I need to practice at least once a week. So
and I definitely agree with you. When it comes to training, they do say 2 weeks off, and it's almost like a go back to a relearn or a reset. But the one thing about physicality is we have muscle memory. So we do come back faster. But and the same thing, I think, with our abilities to absorb information mentally with our minds and spiritually and emotionally with our hearts. I think it's the same thing. I think, if you don't train those muscles, they're going to apathy and get smaller. So, you said so much stuff that I have all these notes that I kind of wanted to ask you. The first one is, when you had the example of being in the car, which is so relatable to so many people, it reminded me of Rupert, my partner, who gets so angry in the car, and I'm just looking at him and I always feel that, his response to anger is sometimes not appropriate. Now, when you discuss these things, I feel like you're tapping into what, spiritual people call the observer or the witness. And I don't know if that's a terminology that you use, but where you actually become a little bit, you can see a high perspective. You're able to, and maybe that's why you're so empathic. Do you feel like you kind of bring those concepts in?
I'm so glad you said that. Some of my synonyms for spirit, mind, and body are observer, thinker, and earth suit. I immediately wanted to find new ways of saying spirit.
That's better than meat sack.
Yeah, the earth suit thing came when I was with Fereshta and we were hanging out with Marianne Williamson, and Marianne one day said, "Oh, the meat suit." And I had a visceral reaction to that.
I know, I've heard that, yeah.
I kind of enjoyed earth suit or avatar versus meat suit. So that's actually where that popped from. So observer, thinker, earth suit is my alternate way of saying spirit, mind, and body. So when I'm talking to our fellow members of Team Humanity and we're talking about really deep topics, I like to use synonyms that I think they can relate to a little bit more than some of the kumbaya synonyms that I have in my head, but I'm very aware some of my teammates and fraternity brothers might not fully connect with. And really quick on your partner with anger, I just wanted to share for anybody listening, if you ever studied Marshall Rosenberg or Nonviolence for Communication, there is this interesting debate on whether anger guilt, and shame are actually feelings or thoughts masquerading as feelings. And what I've discovered is there's some energy in the words guilt, shame, and anger that aren't the same energy in pain or anxious or deeply hurt. So my take, and this is open, my take is that anger, guilt, and shame are actually thoughts masquerading as feelings on top of some very deep feelings. So even people who say, I feel angry, I've noticed that that will actually rile them up. But if they say, you know, I have a deep amount of pain right now, based on what you said, I'm noticing I'm not getting the respect that I'm needing from you. Would you be willing to reflect back what you're hearing me say? There's something different between pain and I feel angry. So I just want to throw that out there, that maybe anger might be a thought masquerading as a feeling.
I love that. It reminds me of Dr. Joe Dispenza a lot about thoughts and emotions, and thoughts are the vehicle of the mind and emotions are the vehicle from the heart. You know, he talks a lot about that. My last question, I don't want to, you know, but I have to get this. Like when you talk about brain 1, 2, 3, and 4, are you talking about brainwave activities from beta, alpha, theta, and is that what you're referring to when you? Because I noticed you kind of popped that out a little bit, and I'm like, what's he talking about? Is that like?
I see you working. So there are the delta, theta, alpha, and beta brainwaves.
Yeah, I know.
That is 1, 2, 3, and 4. So thank you for the clarity, because I was literally talking about the reptilian brain or the lizard brain as 1,
okay,
the limbic system as 2, the neocortex as 3, and the prefrontal lobe as 4.
Okay, that's great.
For anybody listening, usually they're described as being 3 parts. Yeah. And the prefrontal lobe and the neocortex are considered one and the same partners. But the way that I like to teach when I'm doing trauma and resiliency, I like to say the repto's connected to the limbo's connected to the neo's connected to the prefro, and that's the story of the brain. But don't forget about the hippo.
I'll never forget it now. You know, never forget that, because, you know, I do forget which is which sometimes. But,
yes, I'm not very playful at all when I coach. I'm very stale and boring.
Well, and Tony, I think that's one thing that really was a gift for me from you, was you were teaching this stuff that was really heavy. And I said this to you last week, but you were saying it with brightness, with lightness. And I don't mean that in a positive spin way, just in a, I'm still going to be me while sharing some stuff that's heavy. And what I said to you was it felt heavy yet held, which is really soothing to my nervous system, that I'm not just left with heavy, that I'm left with hopefulness within knowing what's really happening. And I would love, this is my question, because I was deeply touched by this story of yours, was the cop chasing you story of your youth and how that impacted you. That's a great place we can understand how to be empathic allies.
Oh, I love that.
Thank you for that reflection. It is, I mean, visibility, I think, is one of the highest human needs we have. The other way people say visibility is seen, heard, and understood. But I think one word is an umbrella is a lot more efficient. So thank you for that visibility. I truly appreciate it and take it in fully and wholeheartedly. It was interesting. After our time together during the webinar, during Transforming Racism into Connection and Kindness Empathically, the next webinar I had, somebody wrote back on their social media and said that it was amazing because he shared his pain without inflicting pain. It was heavy, but it was heavy, but it was heartfelt. And the last thing he said, it was powerful, but it wasn't punishing. And so your heavy and held seemed like it came from that same space, that it is painful, but I'm not inflicting pain. And so to honor your question about the police officer story, I just want to back up a half a second and say that as an American of African ancestry who grew up with an anthropologist uncle, I was one of those children who entered Montessori at 4 years old, didn't have any parents to speak baby talk. So the conversations we're having now, I've literally been having since I was 4 years old and can remember since I was 8 years old. So I'm 8 years old and my anthropologist uncle says to me, oh, by the way, mom had her PhD in psychology and dad had his MBA. So even though they were 3 family members born pre-civil rights and I was born post-civil rights, they actually did a lot of healing so that when I came in as this blank canvas, they would just fill me up with as much empowerment and dignity and self-worth as they could. And hopefully you're experiencing a little bit of their sacrifice today. So my uncle says to me, have they taught you about human variation yet? I'm like, dude, I'm 8 years old, man. What are you talking about? And he's like, well, Montessori needs to get on it. They need to teach about human variation. And I'm like, okay, what is human variation? He said, it's the scientific term that we misrefer to as race. And he takes his hands and he goes, because race is the entirety, not the variety. That's human variation. He goes, I don't mind if people use the terms, but I want them to always caveat it by saying, I preface this comment with the truth that humans are shades of brown and that race is social and political and not biological. And I'm like, do you really expect people to say that? And you go, no, but it's maybe an aspiration that you will carry as a legacy. So to my uncle, as a tribute, I preface my comments with the reminder that human beings are shades of the same one color brown, from the lightest variation to the highest one around, and that the concept of race is social, political, and not biological. Exactly. There you go, Uncle Harry. So,
thank you, Uncle Harry.
There you go.
Uncle Harry.
Yeah, that's
about 10 years old. Thank you, KW. I'm about 10 years old, and I'm headed off to a Little League game. And I'm with probably 10 or 15 friends. You know, it was a multi-complex, so there was many games going on, and there's many friends that we're walking to the ballpark with in the morning, Northern California, that nice, clear, fresh air that you could imagine in Northern California during that springtime of year. And halfway to the ballpark, we realized that we had forgotten our baseball gloves. We had left them in our lockers in the elementary school, but the school was on our way to the field, so we just thought, hey, we know where that little space in the fence is. We'll slide through it. We know the one window that doesn't lock, so we'll crack it open. Somebody will go in. They'll unlock the door. We'll go to our lockers, and that's what we did. He went through the window, unlocked the door. We went to our lockers. We used our combos. Everybody got their gloves, and since we didn't think anything of it, we just walked out the front door. Well, a lovely Caucasian woman did think something of it and called 911 while we were inside. And when we came out, we were swarmed by police. I mean, swarmed. You would have thought that some kid in the South had gone into a church and gunned down 9 African-American kids or adults or something like that in a church. That's the kind of presence that we found in front of us. And for anybody listening, I hope you got that reference.
Yeah.
And as we came out, all of a sudden, this energy started flowing through me. I didn't know anything about Eckhart Tolle's collective pain body. I didn't know what intergenerational trauma was, but I knew there was something that was being channeled through me that I had no experience with and that wasn't connected to me at all. And it didn't say, get out of here. It didn't say, your mom's gonna be pissed. It said, escape. It said, escape. And I didn't know what to do with it, but I was just like, I'm out of here. And I just took off, and I'm running, and I'm out of there, and I'm running. And all of a sudden, this police officer who looked like Hulk Hogan starts chasing me. So I'm running, Hulk Hogan's chasing me. I'm running, Hulk Hogan's chasing me. And all of a sudden, Hulk Hogan yells, freeze! And that same voice, which I know now is my collective pain body, which I know now is intergenerational trauma, said, if you want to survive this, stop. If you want to make it through this, you need to stop where you are. And so I turned around, and Hulk Hogan was walking towards me. And like Einstein's theory of relativity, it could have been 10 seconds, it could have been 10 minutes. There was just nothing but me and Hulk Hogan in that moment. And he puts his hand on my shoulder and he said, for the rest of your life, I want you to remember this. I didn't chase you because you're black. I chased you because you ran. Everything's going to be okay. This has nothing to do with you. And hey, is that a Wilson A2000 glove? That's kind of like the one I used. Maybe if you ever get to the big leagues, you can leave me a ticket on opening night. So I tell that story for a couple of reasons. One, because if anybody's familiar with implicit bias, that subconscious prejudgment in favor of one group or one consequence in comparison to another, most people's implicit bias is going to take them where they imagine that story was going to go. And for 99.9% of African-American men in this culture, that is where it goes. It doesn't happen the way it happened towards me. And what that police officer, what Hulk Hogan did for me, he left my dignity intact, he left my self-worth intact, and he left my empowerment skills intact. And I take that as a legacy, meaning other folks who've been robbed of their dignity, been robbed of their self-worth, been robbed of their empowerment, they're not able to speak about this the way I'm able to speak about it. They are not able to tell their stories because they are in their survival brain. They are in brain one trying to heal, not only trying to heal from their traumatic experience, they've got millions of ancestors flooding their body trying to heal from their experience, while radical Caucasian extremists are opening up the wounds every day with monuments and Confederate flags. So because I've done the work, because my parents did the work, because I healed, and because Hulk Hogan, the police officer, kept my dignity, self-worth, and empowerment in check, I'm able to tell this story. And since most people's minds went to the other direction, you're viscerally empathizing with most African-American men in general. So that is my police story. Fereshta, did you want me to share the second part of that with the Trader Joe's in India?
Yeah, I think I would love to hear, because I know the story. Maybe either Kelly, if they want to share impact with you, just for more visibility and being seen. I don't know if that landed for you all as much as it did for me.
It did.
Yeah.
And I do want to comment, because obviously my brother's a police officer, and, you know, we've discussed that before. And, you know, my mind did go to the worst scene in that story that you shared with us so beautifully. It brought tears to my eyes. And that, you know, that story is so powerful because it empowers you, but it also empowers police officers that want to do the right thing, you know, that, you know, are trying to navigate in there, like we talked, gang, you know, the gang of the blue, you know, they're in a society that they can't, rat on each other. They have to protect each other because, you know, it's the thin blue line, as my brother says, you know, but, you know, it's just, to me, it just kind of was very heartfelt and really resonated. And it would be a story that I would want my brother to hear and any police officers to hear. And also understanding, like what you said about, you know, that attacking force is from these painful experiences, and how if we can kind of understand that, and from the collective pain body that, you know, they may share, even if you believe in reincarnation, it could be even past lives and ancestral lineage, and it can go even deeper than just this life we live right now in our earth suit, as you say, right? So thank you for sharing that. You know, it was really, really very powerful.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a question there. I just think I rambled.
It could just be a comment. Yeah, I also had like full body chills when you started getting to the end of the story. I think one thing that kind of landed for me was that the police officer, you lovingly referred to him as Hulk Hogan, he was not trained in what he did or offered or provided to you, right? Like, I don't know that for a fact, but I'm going to assume that I'm like 99% correct, that he was not trained in how to do what he did for and with you. Yeah. So he's the anomaly. And so he was very empathetic to the situation. He knew how much fear was probably in you, right? He knew probably why you were running, and he did the right thing. So there becomes sort of this pinnacle of, how can we take that? And this isn't necessarily a question for you, but how, I guess the larger question is, from a retraining of police officers across the country, how do we take what that guy did intuitively and make that part of the training? I think so, yeah. That's my first one. And less importantly, I just was curious, did you know his name? And if so, did you send him a ticket to opening day when you were on the Rangers?
The answer to question 2 is I held space for him. I didn't know the name, but I left a ticket in a blank in my locker on the chair, in tribute of that moment. And to question number 1, and then I'll say the second half of the story, because it really connects to this toxic group privilege topic that we're discussing, is I think that because I was in a fraternity, because I've always been on teams, there is a sense of this group connection, empathic understanding that I've always had around what KW was talking about with the thin blue line. And I don't know if it is some type of energy of understanding that can be picked up, but I always get the sense if somebody gets that you get them, there's some empathic energy or spirit that just floods their body, and they may act in ways that they have no idea why they're acting that way, but they just get an energetic hit that somehow you get their experience. And I think that's really powerful. And I know that once I went through Pledge Week, I was a 17-year-old freshman. I had come in at 16 and just turned 17 at UCLA. And so during that Pledge Week, going through this, I call it getting to the other end of the painbow instead of rainbow, because I signed up for this thing, but on the other side was inclusion and acceptance and brotherhood. And there is something really intoxicating about that. And so I get what I think police officers experience on a slightly connective, experiential level. So I think part of my experience would be super helpful. One, because when I'm talking to folks in groups, especially men, they'll turn into little 12-year-olds back on their Little League field. When I start talking about, oh, you know, my teammates were Sammy Sosa and Juan Gonzalez, and my locker mate was Nolan Ryan, they won't be grown adults in front of me. It took me a little second to learn when an adult turns into a little kid in front of your eyes, like what that is. But I realized they're remembering their baseball dreams when they were little kids. And so I think that combination of me being in a fraternity, playing sports, and kind of not going at this in a kumbaya way could really be helpful in training police. And I think the things that my anthropologist uncle taught me about using the terms group privilege, whether it's ethnic group privilege or gender group privilege or athletic group privilege versus the W privilege term, I think there's non-violence for communication ways that we can have this conversation that'll be much more effective. While I say that, I want to honor all the ways that people are doing it now. Yeah. I'm just wanting to mention, I'm kind of in the next paradigm when you're ready. The second part of this story is, so think about the Hulk Hogan situation and how I was left with my dignity, my self-worth, and my empowerment. Now, I was carrying that with me through my adult life. So I had a foundation to hold on to, and I also was having Deepak Chopra, Wayne Dyer, Eckhart Tolle, Marianne Williamson, John Gray. I was also having the wisdom of these folks as a foundation as well. I just had come back from India, and I was vibing on a whole, I didn't even know you could vibe at that level. I was just flying. I didn't even feel my feet on the ground for like 3 weeks. I'm in a Trader Joe's in Los Angeles where I live, and I'm in line, and this lovely Caucasian woman turns around smiling and says, "Have you ever been to India?" And I'm like, "I just got back. How did you know?" She said, "My intuition told me before I even saw you." The beauty of having someone's energy see you before their eyes see you, especially as an American of African ancestry in this culture, is an unbelievable gift. So not only am I vibing from coming back from Mumbai and being with Arun Gandhi, but now I'm just vibing in general because this lovely American of European ancestry is seeing me for me. 5 minutes later, I'm in the parking lot, going to my car, still vibing high. So I wasn't super paying attention to all the non-positive, toxic energy in the round. And I get in the elevator, and this lovely Caucasian woman greets me with her fear. The fear was in her eyes, the fear was in her body language, and the fear was in her slight purse clutch, which for anyone who's listening who is not an American of African ancestry, we have radar. And our radar can pick up the difference between somebody is adjusting their garments, adjusting their purse, or experiencing the threat of absolute terror and moving a half a centimeter. That radar is just the same way I know how to take a 95-mile-an-hour slider that's on the outside corner for a ball, and how I know when to swing at that 95-mile-an-hour slider that is just about to hit the black as a strike. Same radar as I have as an American of African ancestry. So anybody who's questioning, do they really know the difference? How do they know? They don't know. Same, if you've ever seen a baseball player do their thing, that's how I know. So she looks at me like I am a threat. And what I learned through nonviolence for communication is that contributing to the well-being of another person is one of the highest human needs and one of our highest life purposes. Being seen as a threat to somebody's well-being, if you can imagine, is the exact opposite. and it crushed my soul. Here, this woman in the line had just seen me for who I was and my energy in India, and now this other person was seeing me as a threat to her well-being and saying, "You're dangerous to me."
Yeah.
And I wasn't even able to imagine what somebody could pick up 5 minutes earlier and what this person was picking up in that moment. Because for spiritual folks, and most of the folks listening to this are seekers on their journey, for spiritual folks, we've kind of been taught about the law of attraction. You are responsible for the energy you bring into the room. So the woman who knew I just went to India was partly because of the energy I brought into that space. This woman in the elevator, the law of attraction is telling me I'm responsible for the energy in that room. But, you know, I'm a baseball player who's trying to improve and grow and know and think and contemplate life. So I wasn't just going to stop there and think, oh, that's the way it is. I did what I do. I hibernated, which means I went to an alone place, no eating, no drinking, no going to the bathroom, and I wasn't going to come out until I figured it out. 3 hours later, and I literally pulled myself under the covers. 3 hours later, I came out and I had it. KW, KC, Fereshta. I was free. I was liberated. I had realized the first woman in Trader Joe's, that was intuition, that guiding energy source that comes from love and abundance, right?
Yeah.
Second woman, that lovely Caucasian woman in the elevator, that wasn't that guiding energy source that comes from love and abundance. That was the projection of prejudgment that comes from scarcity and fear. And anybody who studied Wayne Dyer, we talk about abundance and we talk about scarcity. So if that was the projection of prejudgment coming from scarcity and fear, it wasn't intuition, it was out tuition.
Exactly.
And I am not responsible for the energy I bring into the room with someone's out tuition. That's all theirs. So I was liberated and I was free. And as an American of African ancestry, boy, did I need to be free of that, because there are many times when people are saying, whoa, you know, what did you do? How did you cause it? Nope, not me. I'm liberated and I'm free. So that was the kind of second half to the Hulk Hogan story, is I learned through a very painful, excruciating experience that I could be liberated and free from somebody's out tuition.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I do. I love that. And it's also, too, you know, besides the law of attraction, it's the law of reflection, which is something was illustrated in that experience with her, with the Caucasian woman in the elevator. A law of reflection, meaning that a bright light is really a mirror for her. And when she really sees you as a threat, it is really a reflection of her own lack of
threatening herself, being a threat to herself.
Maybe. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. She doesn't trust herself.
What's that?
That she doesn't trust herself.
She doesn't trust herself, and as a law of reflection, and as him being a mirror to her own fears, lack of, you know, what she sees is it's really herself being reflected back to her, but she can't understand that. She doesn't have the mindset, the open heart to understand that. So instead she projects onto Tony. And
I do think that there's an element of truth to that, but we are also talking about racism and systemic racism. So I don't want to discount the fact that
no, of course not.
She also obviously was racist, right? And what she knew from growing up in, I'm assuming this happened, if it's a Trader Joe's, it was somewhere in the United States, right? You said it was LA. So, you know, she, from generations to generations, this was what was programmed in her.
Of course.
And so there was part of that as well, you know?
Of course, because it's ancestral. It's part of our own, you know, it's the narrative that we're taught as a child. That is a part of our programming. But we're also, you know, we are all, again, the law of oneness, we are all stripping away from our earth container, our earth form. We are all one. We are all spirit. So these stories that we have told each other about racism are stories that need to be, that's the paradigm that needs to be changed and shifted. And, you know, people like Tony and all of us are trying to do the best we can.
And kind of piggybacking off what KC said, it reminded me that in a way, what I call out tuition, the projection of prejudgment come from scarcity and fear, is what we call racism or racist in a really interesting spiritual way. Exactly. And it's that one is directed to Americans of African ancestry. And for anybody listening, if they are like, hey, you know what, dude, get down to what you think racism is. We're like digging your kumbaya stuff, but give us some like things that we can hold on to. So here's how I understand racism. For racism to exist, systematic racism, one group, so in this situation we're talking about ethnic group, even though as to honor my uncle, I preface this comment with a reminder that human beings are shades of the same one color brown, from the lightest variation to the highest one around, and that race is a social and political construct, not biological. With that said, when one group has governmental, legal, educational, and political power over another group, those are the four elements that need to be in place for racism to exist. So anybody who's saying there's such a thing as reverse racism, that would mean you'd have to go back to 1619 and literally redo everything in reverse and have that exist. So obviously that is not possible. But bigotry is ideological. So if you don't like someone for their ideas, that's bigotry. Prejudice is what you're talking about most often. That's personal. When you don't like somebody for their earth suit, for their culture, for the way they speak, that's prejudice. But racism, systematic racism, requires governmental, legal, educational, and political power of one group over another group. And there is only one group in the history of America that has ever had governmental, legal, educational, and political power. So, on that note, where were we in the conversation?
That's actually something that Owen had brought up on one of our previous, I think it was the first episode of structural racism and spirituality. And he was like, I cannot be racist because I don't have power. Right. And so I think that was an important statement. So thank you for just, furthering that, because I think that the more that we hit these things over and over again and approach them from different angles and using a little bit of different verbiage, I think it just becomes more ingrained and we become more aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Thank you. And I do love the way, Tony, that you, how you kind of explain, like I'm looking back on some of my notes I'm writing, like I loved when you said group privilege. For me, I resonate that because when somebody says white privilege to me, or if somebody has said white woman, like I'm a middle-aged white woman privilege, I mean, that kind of gets, as a spiritual being, that gets my hair on the back of my skin is up a little bit, and I go into the state of wanting to defend that instead of being open to understanding the conversation that, yes, it's true, but I don't feel like I'm so open to that conversation. But by saying group privilege, that just opens my heart. Does anybody else feel the same way?
I don't. I mean, go ahead, Fereshta. I'll go.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, in terms of something that resonated with Tony's teachings, hadn't occurred to me, like academic privilege or, for you, athletic privilege. It was like, oh, now when I think of groups, that it can be anyone having privilege, any group. And I guess the W privilege thing for me, honoring how Tony says it, I can see where it makes people bristle and want to defend themselves. So that what you teach about, instead of having, if we want connection, we can't have separation language.
Exactly.
I'm curious about that world too.
Yeah.
And
Kelly, we'll get you all sorted.
And and I'm about to do a screen share just for people who are curious specifically. Privilege is where things work to the benefit of one group in comparison to another group. And I do use the term group privilege because as a man, I want to recognize that I have gender group privilege, that at 10 o'clock at night in a parking lot, I'm not too concerned about my physical safety when I'm walking in the parking lot. Mm-hmm. And I want to acknowledge that I do have gender group privilege. I do have academic group privilege growing up in Palo Alto, California. And I do have athletic group privilege. And the way that I like to share with people is think of group privilege like a passport. Passports grant us access or entry into spaces where we're not allowed access if we don't have that passport. Okay. And group privilege is like a passport, and then ethnic group privilege is like a super passport in this country. So I'm wanting to acknowledge that there are similarities, but I'm also wanting to emphasize that ethnic group privilege is like a supersized passport in our culture. And I love that we got to share this piece about group privilege, because when I'm talking to my friends and I say, I've grown up on both sides of group privilege. I've had athletic privilege and I've had gender group privilege, but I haven't had ethnic group privilege. My friends the same ones who will bristle at W privilege will go, oh man, I guess that's, kind of me. I don't have to worry about the police situations. I think of them as protect and serve, where you think of it at the police as, and they're repeating me, something that I'd said before. They're like, you think of the police as this might be the last day of my life. I guess that is a real burden not to have, to think about life through those lenses. And the only reason they were able to have that conversation with me is because I used a term that they didn't hear as an indictment of their character. I also want to acknowledge all the folks who are doing the work and who don't need to be teaching or coaching anybody anything, and who want to say the words and the language and the terms any way that they want to. So I'm willing to take all of the weight of using the different terminology, while I honor and acknowledge the activists who are doing the groundwork, the policy work, and the behavior work. So I'm giving a shout out to all those folks. The language, that's a me thing. I'm in the next paradigm. I'm ready to think of ourselves as members of Team Humanity. I'm ready to speak empathically. I'm ready to spark change through compassionate resistance. The old term the Gandhis and Martin Luther King Jr. used was passive resistance. But again, my fraternity brothers and my teammates, they're not able to hear that term. So I use compassionate resistance. So those are actually my 3 keys to unity: is seeing each other as members of Team Humanity, speaking empathically, and sparking change through compassionate resistance, which means empathy through proactivity. So it's protective force. It is power with others, and it's through cooperation. So thank you for bringing up that piece about group privilege. And thank you for your patience of allowing me to go on that tangent.
No, I love the tangent. I love the tangent. I need the tangent.
I could listen all day.
Just to kind of wrap up that whole group privilege versus white privilege, I do think that there is a place for it, because as you highlighted really eloquently, the ethnic component of that is the supercharge, or is like the most heightened of all privileges, right? And that's the one that we're all talking about. So people like, Robin DiAngelo, right? Talking about white fragility. I mean, one of the best books that I've ever read. Something that you said, Kel, sort of makes me initially, just to be completely transparent, it makes me like judge that statement when you say like, oh, when someone calls me a white woman or a privileged white woman, and I bristle at it, immediately I'm like, oh, that's white fragility in action, right? And so when I first learned about that book and first learned about the terminology that Robin DiAngelo was using, I noticed that I had like a very minor bristling. And then I was like, that makes me actually want to lean into it more, so that I can eventually decrease that bristling to the point where I have shared that book with, I've probably bought it for about 40 different people, because I'm like, we have to lean into this. If it makes us uncomfortable, that's what these conversations are all about.
Sure. Right? No, I agree about leaning into it and understanding, I think with all of us that experience that in the place where we are in our path right now, we may experience that in our bodies, but we also know by taking a deep breath and centering ourselves, finding where the source comes from is, I'm sure is, I haven't read the book, but finding what the source is and digging in. It's digging deep. It's like pulling the layers away. It's like when you do shadow work, it's pulling away and stripping away and coming to that sense of understanding. Of course, I've been programmed in certain ways my life growing up and experiencing the things I have. But how do I approach those now as an adult, fully eyes open and wanting to see other people and wanting to be seen? So, but I do. I'll read that book. I'm going to read the book.
I'll send you a copy.
Send me a copy.
I'm glad you brought up the book, because I really think that there is when Fereshta was at the webinar and we talked about transforming racism into connection and kindness empathically, was something, the way I saw it, was something sustainable to hold on to, and then something to carry with you while you're doing all of the other work around toxic group privilege, and then something to come back to, something when you need a recharge, an empathic spiritual recharge, it's something to come back to. So I love that KC and Robin are using those words to spark discomfort. And I'm very aware that for me, in my earth suit, my avatar as an American of African ancestry, it is way more effective for me not to say terms that, hey, little doggy, that is not to say terms that are an indictment of somebody's character. So I've learned to quickly rebalance and reset any term. And when KW was speaking, I was like, an indictment of her character. That term, she was hearing that in a personal way. And my friends, and that's why I gauge a lot of my terminology and work off my fraternity brothers and teammates, because they are tough nuts to crack. Right. And I figure if I can connect with them, I can connect with anybody. So I love what you're saying, KC, about Robin's work. And I think that you using that terminology is so powerful. And I also think that me saying American of African ancestry, human beings being shades of brown, human variation is the scientific term. I think those two things are a complement. And so we can see where we are and we can see where we can go at the same time. So I'm really excited you brought that up, because I think we can celebrate both parts. And I hope nobody feels uncomfortable using the terminology that they want to use. There is no invitation or request on the table to use my terminology, though I love when you do it, Fereshta. But I want you to use what you're comfortable with. And then kind of like I learned at UCLA with Coach Wooden, who taught us delete perfection and upload excellence. He taught us that perfection had a psychological ceiling, but excellence was expansive and open-ended. And we can be excellent today, a little bit more excellent tomorrow, and a little bit more excellent the day after. And it looks a lot like what we thought perfection looked like without the hangover. And so I'm really thinking, when I'm constantly looking for the most excellent, empowering, and dignified terms, while you are using like street terms to get into people's like hearts and consciousness and gut, I really believe that the partnership of those two styles is probably synergistic. 1 and 1 makes 3.
Yeah. Right. True.
And the use of excellence, is that why you named your book Excellence Off the Field?
Yay! So we're sitting in the dugout of Jackie Robinson Stadium. I have a statue of Mr. Robinson staring at me here, and I have Coach Wooden, the winningest coach in college basketball history, teaching us the pyramid of success. And when he talked about never try to be better than somebody else, but never cease to try to be the very best that you can be, and delete perfection and upload excellence, I literally was learning how to delete anything that was no longer useful for me in a split second. And I kind of thought that's how everybody did it. So I was having a conversation with a friend the other day, and they used a term that I found really, they used the term low wealth instead of low income. And I was like, I love that. I almost don't remember using the previous term. And that's all because of Coach Wooden and the thing about excellent. So when I went to write a book, which by the way came through me from first moment of pen hitting paper to holding a copy in my hand, 4 months. It channeled through me in 4 months to where I was holding it. I wasn't even going to do it. It wasn't even on the agenda. And then 4 months later, it was sitting in my hand. When I thought about the title, I thought Excellence Off the Field, which to me means if you are an athlete who strives to be excellent on the field, you can also be excellent off the field. And then the second meaning is, remember, you don't have to be an athlete to be excellent off the field. So it was speaking to everybody. I was speaking to my boys saying, hey, I know you're awesome at this. Let's be more awesome off the field too. And for anybody reading it, hey, dude, this is how you can be excellent in your everyday life. So thank you for bringing it up, Kelly. I really appreciate that. Excellent off the field. I'm really proud of. And Fereshta read it and wrote notes on it, and it touched my heart. It was just amazing, her reflection and the way that she was able to hold some of the ideas that my entire life has been a testament to.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely going to put a note or a link to that on Amazon in the show notes for today's episode. If we're ready to wrap up, I think this has been an incredible conversation, and I want to thank you so much for joining us. You have no idea how much this really touched me. I loved this conversation so much.
Me too,
and Tony too, if you would let us know when you have those classes, you're calling webinars, but when you have those, we can let our folks know as well. They're really deep and meaningful.
Yeah, I would love to take one too. I would love to.
My East Coast cousins got on me for having 7 p.m. webinars. So I was doing them Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7 p.m.
Yeah.
And my East Coast cousins, they were like, hey, we need a 7 o'clock for us. So Tuesdays are at 4 p.m. California time or 7 p.m. East Coast time. And Thursdays are 10 Eastern time and 7 California. Every Tuesday and Thursday, 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. You can see it if you text It's Tricky to 44 Empathy 7. If you text It's Tricky to 44 Empathy 7, you will get the link. And It's Tricky means transforming racism into connection and kindness empathically. And even though 44 Empathy 7 is a vanity number, I promise you, when your brain types out empathy, watch out what happens for the next hour of your day. I promise you, in the moment, it'll be like, "Arr," but for the next hour, you will be empathic. I promise, I promise, I promise. And I want to do, before we close, I want to do a quick mic check, a repeat after me game, and bring you into the Empathy Institute team. Is everybody ready to do a quick mic check?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right. Mic check.
Mic check.
Mic check.
With strength and kindness,
With strength and kindness.
with bravery and empathy,
With
bravery and empathy,
we will affect positive change
we will affect
positive change.
spiritually, emotionally, and physically.
Spiritually, emotionally, and physically.
Mic's off. Welcome. You are the new empathic warriors on Team Empathy.
All right. All right.
Congratulations.
Tony, thank you so much again for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you,
Together
Tony.
we rise,
so
together we fly. I'm Tony
Yeah.
Scruggs, the empathy guy.
Bye.
much.